Do it now, I can't take more deeper. What the rancher chose next shocked the frontier. The sun rose slowly over the wide, golden plains, stretching its warm light across the rolling hills. The air smelled dry and dusty, carrying the faint scent of hay and the faint tang of cattle. Eli Turner, he stood on the small rise near his ranch, squinting at the horizon. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered, with weathered hands that told the story of years spent working the land. His face was lined, not just from age but from responsibility, worry, and the hard life of the frontier. Eli had always believed in the simple rules: work hard, care for your family, and respect your neighbors. That was enough to earn a man trust in these parts. The Turner Ranch was one of the larger ones in the region, though it was nothing compared to the vast estates of the wealthiest ranchers. Still, it was home, and it was everything Eli cared about. The fence that ran along the edge of the property was sturdy, repaired meticulously by Eli himself and a few trusted hands. Beyond it, the cattle grazed peacefully, some chewing the dry grass lazily, others wandering close to the shade of the few trees scattered across the land. Birds flitted above, their chirping mixing with the low murmur of the wind. It seemed like any other morning, calm and ordinary, but Eli knew better. Lately, the land had been harsh. Rain had been scarce, leaving the fields dry and brittle. Streams that once trickled gently now ran almost dry, leaving the cattle searching for water. It was the kind of drought that tested every rancher's patience and endurance. Eli had been working harder than ever, waking before sunrise, riding across his property to check on the cattle, repairing the fences, and making sure that his family had enough food and water. He never complained, though. Complaining was useless here. Life on the frontier required action, not words. Eli's wife, Martha, she had been up since dawn too. She carried a small basket filled with eggs, bread, and fresh milk from the cows, walking carefully across the uneven ground. Martha had a gentle strength, the kind that held the family together even when times were tough. Her hair, usually tied back neatly, had strands that escaped in the morning breeze, brushing her cheeks. Her eyes often followed Eli as he worked, a mixture of concern and pride in the way he handled everything. She had grown used to his long hours, his quiet moods, and the sense of responsibility that weighed on him like a heavy cloak. Eli's children, Tommy and Lily, they were still asleep, tucked away in their small wooden house a little distance from the main ranch. Tommy, 12, had his father's adventurous spirit and often rode with him on short trips to check the fences or help herd the cattle. Lily, 8, was more cautious, preferring to stay close to Martha, helping with chores and learning the ways of the land. Eli loved them both fiercely, and he worked each day to give them the life he had grown up without, a life where they could dream, learn, and grow in safety. Despite the calm morning, Eli couldn't shake a feeling of unease. He had heard whispers from neighboring ranchers about rustlers moving through the area. Small things had been missing: tools, hay, even a calf that had wandered off. Nothing had been proven, but the warning signs were there. And on the frontier, signs were often all you had before disaster struck. Eli's mind wandered over the possibilities, imagining how these people could try to take what he had worked so hard to build. He had seen it before, seen families ruined by thieves, lives disrupted, and reputations destroyed. He didn't want that for his own family, so he rode out to check the fences again. His horse, a strong bay named Shadow, moved steadily under him. Eli patted Shadow's neck, whispering softly to calm the animal as they crossed the uneven terrain. He stopped at each fence post, checking for signs of tampering or weakness. The wind tugged at his coat, and the dry grass crackled under the horse's hooves. For a while the world seemed still, peaceful even, but Eli's instincts told him that peace was fragile. He had learned to trust that instinct over the years. It had saved him before. As he rode, he thought about the history of the land. His family had come here decades ago, following the promise of open skies and fertile soil. The Turner name had become known in the region for honesty, hard work, and fairness. Eli remembered stories his father had told him, tales of long days in the sun, of cattle drives, and of challenges that seemed impossible at the time. Those stories were lessons, teaching him that life on the frontier required courage, resilience, and sometimes tough decisions. Eli carried those lessons in his heart as he looked across the plains, knowing that today would demand all of those qualities. By mid-morning, Eli reached the far end of his property, a place where the land sloped down into a shallow valley. There he found a patch of trampled grass and broken fencing. His stomach tightened. This was a clear sign that someone or something had been there recently. He dismounted, walking quietly, eyes scanning for footprints or tire tracks. The soil was dry, but he could make out hoofprints and boot marks pressed into the dirt. Someone had been here. Someone had been testing the boundaries. Eli's heart beat faster, but he forced himself to remain calm. Panic would not help. He gathered a few tools and began repairing the fence, hammering nails and tying wires with practiced hands. Each strike of the hammer was measured, precise, and deliberate. He worked silently, thinking about how he would confront the intruders if they came back. He knew that fear could be as dangerous as the rustlers themselves. A man who panicked was easy to outsmart, easy to manipulate. Eli would not be that man. Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher, beating down on the plains with relentless heat. Sweat ran down Eli's face, but he didn't stop. His muscles ached, his hands were raw, but he pressed on. He thought about Martha and the children, and the thought of them gave him strength. Every nail he hammered, every board he repaired, was a small battle in the larger war of survival. Life on the frontier was not about convenience or comfort. It was about perseverance, about meeting challenges head-on, and about protecting what you loved most. By late afternoon, Eli finished repairing the fence. He stepped back, surveying his work. The lines of posts and wire stretched across the land, a small but firm barrier between his family and potential danger, satisfaction mixed with lingering worry. He knew the rustlers could come back, but he also knew he had prepared as best he could. He mounted Shadow again, riding slowly back toward the main house, thinking about the coming evening, the chores that still awaited him, and the conversations he might have with his neighbors about the increasing tensions. When Eli returned, he found Martha waiting near the porch, a small towel in her hands to wipe his sweat. She smiled, relief in her eyes. "You look worn out," she said gently. "Take a moment to rest." Eli nodded, dismounting and letting the horse graze nearby. He sank into the wooden chair on the porch, letting the breeze cool his skin. He watched the cattle in the distance, the sunlight glinting off their coats. There was beauty here in this land he loved, but also danger. He knew that at any moment that danger could come closer than anyone expected. Eli's mind wandered again, reflecting on the lessons of life he had learned from his father. Toughness was important, yes, but it had to be balanced with wisdom. Strength alone could not protect the family. He needed strategy, patience, and observation. The frontier was as much a mental battle as a physical one. He needed to be ready for whatever came next. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the plains, Eli made a silent promise to himself. No matter what happened, he would protect his family and his land. He would face the challenges of the frontier with courage, careful thought, and a steady hand. And when the time came for the confrontation he sensed was inevitable, he would be ready. In the quiet of the evening, with Shadow grazing nearby and the children playing in the yard, Eli felt a mixture of peace and tension. The frontier could be unforgiving, but it also offered moments of beauty, connection, and hope. And in that balance, between fear and hope, danger and calm, Eli Turner stood as a man ready for the story that was about to unfold, a story that would test him like never before. The morning broke with a pale light spilling over the plains. The air was cooler now, carrying the faint smell of earth and grass from overnight dew. Eli Turner, he was already on his horse, Shadow, riding toward the far side of the ranch. The events of the previous day had left him uneasy, and he felt he needed to check the perimeter again. It was one of those instincts that a man on the frontier could not ignore, the kind that whispered quietly but persistently when something was wrong. As he rode, Eli noticed small signs that made his heart tighten. A broken branch here, a hoof print there, small things that most people would miss, but to him they told a story. Someone or some people had been near his cattle in the night. The tracks were fresh, barely a few hours old, and they led toward the northern edge of his land, the area where the hills dipped into a shallow canyon. Eli slowed Shadow to a careful trot, his eyes scanning every shadow, every stone, every tuft of grass. He reached the edge of the canyon and dismounted, moving quietly on foot. His boots crunched softly on the dry soil. He paused at the top, looking down. There, just beyond the slope, he saw figures moving in the distance. At first, he thought it might be wild animals, but then he recognized the shape of humans. Eli's stomach tightened. His instincts had been right. They were rustlers, testing his land, checking his cattle. Eli took a deep breath and stepped back into the shadow of a small tree, watching them carefully. There were 3 of them, and they were talking in low, urgent whispers. Eli couldn't hear the words, but he could see the tension in their movements. They were not just thieves, they were desperate, and desperation could make people dangerous. He realized he had to act carefully. A wrong move could put his cattle and his family in serious danger. He thought about his options. Confronting them directly could start a fight, and that was risky. They had weapons, probably, and in a struggle, even a strong man like Eli could be hurt. But letting them roam freely would mean they could return at night, steal more, or worse. Eli's mind raced as he tried to plan the best way forward. On the frontier, every decision was a test of both courage and wisdom. Eli decided to approach slowly, keeping to the shadows, using the trees and rocks as cover. He moved quietly, every step deliberate. The rustlers hadn't noticed him yet, their attention focused entirely on the cattle. Eli's heart beat steadily, not with fear, but with the intensity of a man fully aware of the stakes. He knew that if he wanted to protect his property and his family, he needed to show authority without escalating the situation too quickly. As he drew closer, he noticed one of the men holding a rope, apparently planning to lasso one of the calves. Eli's jaw tightened. This was the moment when he had to decide. A rush of anger surged through him, but he forced himself to stay calm. Anger could cloud judgment, and on the frontier, clarity of mind was more important than strength. He took a few more careful steps until he was close enough to speak. "Stop right there," Eli called out, his voice firm and steady. It carried across the canyon, clear enough that the men froze. For a moment there was silence. Then one of them, a taller man with a rough coat, turned toward Eli, his eyes wide with surprise. Who are you?" he asked, his voice wavering. The other 2 looked equally startled, glancing at each other as if unsure whether to run or fight. Eli stayed calm, keeping his hands visible. "I'm Eli Turner," he said. "This is my land and my cattle. I don't want trouble, but I won't let you take what isn't yours." His tone was firm, carrying the weight of someone who had faced dangers before and would not back down easily. The men hesitated. It was clear they hadn't expected a confrontation this soon. Then the taller man stepped forward slightly, his hands raised. We didn't mean any harm. We're desperate. It's been a rough season, no food, no work, we thought maybe." His voice trailed off, uncertainty clouding his face. Eli listened, watching carefully. He could see fear in their eyes, not just fear of being caught, but fear of consequence. He realized that these men were not hardened criminals. They were struggling, like many people in these harsh lands, driven by need rather than malice. Eli considered what he had learned. There was a choice here. He could punish them, call them thieves, and risk a fight, or he could act with a mix of firmness and understanding. The frontier had always demanded tough decisions, and this was one of those moments. He thought about his father, who had always said, "Sometimes, the strongest man isn't the one who strikes first, but the one who knows the right moment to act." Eli nodded silently, making his decision. "Listen," he said, keeping his voice calm but authoritative. "I understand what it's like to struggle, but this isn't the way. You can't take what isn't yours. I won't hurt you if you leave my land and promise not to come back, but if you try again, I will have no choice." He let the words sink in, watching their reactions closely. The taller man's shoulders slumped, and the others lowered their heads. They seemed to understand that Eli's warning was serious, that this was a man who could act if pushed too far, but also a man who was willing to give a chance. For several long moments, there was silence. The wind rustled through the dry grass and a hawk circled overhead, calling out in the distance. Finally, the taller man nodded. "We will go. Thank you for letting us leave." He glanced at the other two, who nodded in agreement. Slowly, carefully, they backed away, moving toward the edge of the canyon and disappearing from view. Eli watched until they were gone, his body tense but controlled. He felt a rush of relief, mixed with exhaustion. This encounter had tested him, tested his judgment, and forced him to confront a situation he had hoped to avoid. Yet, he had handled it. He had protected his land and his family without unnecessary violence, proving not just to the men, but to himself, that he could remain strong and fair under pressure. After ensuring that the rustlers had truly left, Eli returned to his horse and rode back toward the ranch. The sun was higher now, casting a bright light over the plains and making the dust shimmer. Eli's mind was busy, thinking about what had happened and what could still happen in the coming weeks. The frontier was unpredictable, and he knew that more challenges could come, perhaps even worse than today's confrontation. But he also knew he was ready. When he reached the main house, Martha, she was waiting on the porch, a look of worry on her face. "Did everything go all right?" she asked, her voice careful. Eli nodded, dismounting slowly. "Yes, they're gone, no harm done." He paused, seeing the relief in her eyes. "It was close, but I think they understand now. I hope it's enough to keep them away." The children, Tommy and Lily, they ran out to greet him, excited to see him return. Eli knelt to ruffle their hair, smiling despite the tension he still felt. "Everything's fine," he reassured them. "Let's make sure we enjoy the rest of the day." He knew the calm might be temporary, that life on the frontier could change in an instant, but for now, they had a moment of peace. Eli spent the rest of the day repairing minor damage to the fences and checking on the cattle. He worked steadily, methodically, always alert but not frantic. He talked quietly to Martha about the morning, sharing what had happened while being careful not to frighten the children. He emphasized the lessons of respect, caution, and responsibility, showing them through his actions that courage was measured not just by strength, but by thoughtfulness and control. By late afternoon, Eli finally allowed himself a moment to rest. He sat on the porch again, watching the horizon as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. The land was beautiful, wild, and full of life, but it was also dangerous, demanding constant vigilance. Eli knew he had done the right thing today, but he also knew that the frontier would always test him. And when that test came again, he would be ready. As the shadows grew longer and the wind cooled, Eli thought about the lessons of the day. Confrontation had been necessary, yes, but he had handled it with care. The balance between firmness and mercy was delicate, and he had managed to maintain it. He knew the story of today would stay with him, a reminder that life on the frontier was unpredictable, that danger could come at any moment, and that courage was shown not just in action, but in wisdom. The Turner family gathered for dinner that evening, the smell of fresh bread and roasted vegetables filling the air. Laughter and conversation echoed through the small house, a momentary reprieve from the tension outside. Eli looked at his family, feeling a deep sense of responsibility, pride, and hope. The frontier was harsh, but it was home, and he would do everything in his power to protect it. As night fell and the stars appeared in the clear sky above, Eli stood outside for a moment, looking across the ranch. Shadow grazed nearby, the cattle huddled peacefully, and the wind whispered softly through the grass. Eli knew that tomorrow could bring new challenges, perhaps even greater than those of today. But he felt ready. He had faced fear, tested his judgment, and emerged stronger. The frontier demanded resilience, and Eli Turner had proven that he had it in abundance. The morning air was crisp and still, carrying the scent of earth and dry grass across the Turner ranch. Eli Turner, he had been awake before the sun, his mind restless despite the calm night. The events of the previous day lingered in his thoughts. The rustlers had left, yes, but the memory of their frightened eyes and the fear in their voices made him uneasy. On the frontier, peace was fragile, and Eli had learned that a moment of carelessness could undo months of hard work. He mounted Shadow and rode toward the northern pasture, where the intrusion had occurred. His boots pressed into the leather stirrups, and his hands gripped the reins with quiet determination. Each step of the horse brought him closer to the area where the signs of trespass had been the clearest. Eli scanned the ground, looking for anything unusual: broken grass, disturbed soil, even the faintest footprints. His sharp eyes, trained by years of working the land, caught every small detail. By mid-morning, Eli reached the farthest edge of his property. He dismounted, carefully walking along the slope that led into the shallow canyon. The land here was rougher, with rocks and scrub trees scattered unevenly across the soil. He had always liked this part of the ranch for its beauty, the way the sun hit the hills at dawn and the way the wind whistled through the trees. But today, it felt different. There was tension in the air, an unspoken warning that something was coming. As he crested a small rise, he froze. Tracks, fresh ones, deeper and more numerous than yesterday. Someone had been here during the night. Eli's stomach tightened. These were not the same 3 men from before. Whoever had come had done so quietly, leaving no trace of weapons, no signs of hasty movement. It was the work of people who knew how to move across the land without being noticed, skillful, careful, and determined. Eli's mind raced. The rustlers from yesterday had either returned with reinforcements, or this was someone new entirely. Eli remained calm, but his pulse quickened. He scanned the horizon, noting shadows between the trees and dips in the hills. Movement, small, subtle, but unmistakable. The rustlers, or whoever they were near. He could feel the energy in the air, the kind of charged tension that made every sense sharper. He crouched behind a boulder, observing carefully. He had to be smart. A wrong move could lead to a confrontation he might not be ready for. The figures emerged slowly from the trees, a group larger than he expected. At least 5 men this time, moving cautiously, their eyes on the cattle. Eli realized immediately that this was more serious than he had anticipated. They were organized, careful, and desperate. He recognized the signs of experience in their movements. This wasn't a random act of theft. It was a plan, carefully executed. Eli's hands clenched on the reins. He had to think fast. He could not let them take the cattle, and he had to protect his land and family. He stepped back slightly, considering his options. Confrontation could escalate into violence. On the frontier, even the slightest misstep could have serious consequences. But he also knew that hesitation could be worse. These men were counting on fear, on delay, on uncertainty. Eli had to show confidence and control, but also find a way to end the threat without unnecessary harm. He thought about his father's lessons, about strength combined with wisdom. He needed to act decisively and calmly. Eli slowly moved along the ridge, keeping himself hidden in the shadows of the rocks and trees. He positioned himself so that he could see the group without being noticed. Their focus was entirely on the cattle, not on the land around them. He watched as one of the men reached toward a calf, preparing to lasso it. The others spread out slightly, scanning the perimeter. Eli realized that he was outnumbered, at least physically, but not strategically. He had the advantage of knowing the land and having time to observe. He stepped forward, his voice steady and clear. "Stop right there," he called, letting the words carry across the open space. The men froze instantly, startled. One of them, taller than the rest, turned toward him, eyes wide. Who are you?" the man asked, voice shaking. Eli did not move, did not show fear. "I'm Eli Turner," he said firmly. "This is my land, these are my cattle. I won't let you take what isn't yours." The rustlers glanced at each other, confusion and fear on their faces. They hadn't expected someone to confront them with such confidence. The taller man stepped forward slightly, hands raised in surrender. We don't want trouble," he said. "We're just desperate. It's been hard this season. We thought maybe we could, just a few cattle." His voice trailed off. Eli could see the tension in his posture, the fear in his eyes. They were dangerous because of desperation, not because they were inherently cruel. Eli considered his next words carefully. He had to protect his property, but also ensure that no unnecessary harm came to anyone. "I understand that life is hard," he said calmly, "but taking what is yours isn't the way to solve it. Leave my land now and I won't call anyone after you. Try to take anything again and I won't hesitate to act." The words were firm, measured, carrying authority without aggression. There was silence for several tense moments. The wind stirred, rustling the grass and trees, and a hawk circled overhead, its shadow sweeping across the ground. The taller man glanced at his companions, who were hesitant but listening closely. Slowly he nodded. "We will go," he said finally. "We didn't mean to cause trouble." The others murmured their agreement. One by one, they retreated toward the trees at the edge of the canyon, disappearing from sight. Eli watched until he could see no trace of them. Relief washed over him, but he remained cautious. This encounter had tested his judgment, his patience, and his courage. He realized that the frontier was unpredictable. Danger could appear suddenly, and it often came in forms that were not immediately obvious. He had managed to protect his property today, but he knew this was only one challenge among many that he would face. Eli mounted Shadow again, riding slowly back toward the ranch. He kept his eyes on the horizon, aware of the slightest movement. By the time he reached the main house, the sun was high, casting a warm light over the land. Martha, she noticed the tension in his expression immediately. "Did everything go all right?" she asked, worry clear in her voice. Eli nodded, dismounting. "Yes, they've gone." "No one was hurt." He paused, letting the words settle between them. "But it's clear that some people are struggling. We need to stay alert." The children, Tommy and Lily, they ran toward him, excited to see their father return. Eli knelt to ruffle their hair, smiling despite the tension that lingered. "Everything's fine," he reassured them. "Let's finish our chores and then enjoy the rest of the day." He knew that life on the frontier could change in an instant, but moments like these, calm, safe, and full of family, were worth holding on to. As the afternoon wore on, Eli checked the fences, inspected the cattle, and made sure everything was in order. He moved with precision, each step purposeful, each glance attentive. He knew that preparedness was the best defense. Even though the immediate threat had passed, he could not afford to relax completely. The frontier demanded constant vigilance, and Eli had learned that complacency could be costly. Evening fell with a golden glow over the plains. Eli sat on the porch with Martha, watching the sun set. The wind carried the soft sounds of the cattle settling for the night and the faint rustle of trees. "You were brave today," Martha said quietly. Eli shook his head. "Not just bravery," he said. "I had to be wise. Strength alone isn't enough here. You need patience, observation, and timing." She nodded, understanding the weight behind his words. Later that night, as the children slept and the stars sparkled in the clear sky, Eli remained outside, shadow grazing quietly nearby. He thought about the day's events, the men he had confronted, and the choices he had made. There was a part of him that felt uneasy, knowing that the frontier was unpredictable and that new challenges could appear at any moment. But there was also a sense of quiet satisfaction. He had faced danger, tested his resolve, and emerged intact. Eli knew that tomorrow and the days after could bring new challenges, perhaps even more serious than today's encounter. But he also knew he had proven to himself that he could remain calm under pressure, act decisively when necessary, and protect his family and land without causing harm unnecessarily. This balance of courage, wisdom, and restraint would serve him well in the trials yet to come. As he finally went inside to rest, the wind whispered through the grass, carrying the promise of another day on the frontier, a day that would test him even more, and one that he would face with the same careful determination he had shown today. The story of the Turner Ranch was far from over, and the challenges ahead would require all of Eli's strength, patience, and courage. The morning light fell gently over the Turner Ranch, painting the plains in soft shades of gold and orange. Eli Turner, he stood near the fence line, his eyes scanning the horizon. The events of the past few days weighed heavily on him. The rustlers had retreated once, and then again, but Eli could feel the tension in the air. Something told him that this time would be different. The frontier was rarely forgiving, and he had learned that trouble often returned when least expected. Eli mounted Shadow, his horse moving steadily under him. The wind tugged gently at his coat, and the faint sound of cattle lowing carried across the land. He made his way toward the northern pasture, where the disturbances had happened before. Each step was careful, deliberate. Eli was not just looking for trespassers. He was preparing himself for a confrontation that he sensed was inevitable. His instincts, honed over years of working the land, told him that he could not wait for trouble to reach him. He had to be ready. As he crested a small hill, Eli's eyes caught movement near the tree line. This time the rustlers had returned, and there were more of them than before. At least 6 men, moving with a quiet determination that spoke of experience and desperation. They had come prepared, carrying ropes and tools, clearly planning to take the cattle. Eli's heart tightened, but he forced himself to remain calm. Panic would not help. The situation demanded both courage and strategy. Eli dismounted and crouched behind a large boulder, observing the men closely. Their movements were precise, and their focus entirely on the cattle. He could feel the tension in the air, like the moment before a storm breaks. He needed to act, but he also knew that rash action could lead to disaster. The lessons his father had taught him came back to him now. Strength was important, but patience and careful judgment were even more crucial. He stepped out from the cover of the boulder, letting his voice carry across the open land. "Stop right there," he called. The rustlers froze instantly, startled by the clarity and authority in his voice. The tallest of the group turned to face him, his eyes wide with surprise and caution. Who are you?" he asked, voice quivering slightly. Eli's stance was firm. "I am Eli Turner. This is my land and these are my cattle. You will not take them." The rustlers hesitated, exchanging nervous glances. They hadn't expected Eli to confront them so boldly. Desperation was evident in their movements, but so was fear. One of the men whispered to another, and Eli could see the uncertainty in their posture. They were not hardened criminals, but people pushed to the edge by need. Eli understood this. He had seen hardship before, and he knew that desperation could drive people to make risky choices. Eli weighed his options carefully. He could force them off the land, but that might provoke a reaction he could not control. He could call for help, but that would take time and could escalate the situation. Or he could try to reason with them, appealing to their better judgment while making it clear that he would protect his property. The choice was delicate. Every decision he made now would have consequences. He took a deep breath and spoke again, his voice steady and firm. "I know life can be hard. I have felt the weight of it myself. But taking what belongs to others is not the way to solve your problems. Leave now and I will let you go without harm. Try to take my cattle and I cannot promise the same mercy." His words were measured, carrying both authority and understanding. The taller man swallowed hard, glancing at his companions. Fear was evident in his eyes and he took a cautious step back. We didn't want trouble," he said. We need food for our families, please." Eli studied him carefully, noting the sincerity and desperation. He realized that these men were not evil, they were struggling, like so many others on the frontier. Eli made his decision. He could act with force, and many would expect him to, but he chose a different path. He stepped forward, making sure his posture was firm but not threatening. "I will not let you take what isn't yours," he said, "but I can help you find another way. Leave my land and I can guide you to a safe place where you can work honestly and provide for your families." There was silence for several tense moments. The wind rustled the grass and the faint sound of a hawk calling overhead echoed across the plains. The rustlers looked at each other, unsure of how to respond. Finally, the taller man nodded slowly. "We'll leave," he said. "Thank you for letting us go." The others murmured their agreement. One by one, they retreated toward the trees at the edge of the pasture, disappearing from sight. Eli watched until they were gone, his body tense but controlled. Relief washed over him, but it was mixed with lingering concern. The encounter had been a test, not just of his courage, but of his judgment and wisdom. He knew the frontier would continue to test him, and that new challenges would come, perhaps more difficult than today's. But he had faced this one successfully, balancing firmness with understanding. When Eli returned to the ranch, Martha, she was waiting on the porch, worry etched on her face. "Is everything all right?" she asked. Eli nodded, dismounting slowly. "They've gone." "No harm done." He paused, letting the words sink in. "But we must remain vigilant. The frontier is unpredictable and these challenges may not end here." The children, Tommy and Lily, they ran toward him, their laughter momentarily breaking the tension in the air. Eli knelt to ruffle their hair, smiling despite the weight of the day. "Everything's fine," he reassured them. "Now let's finish our chores and enjoy the rest of the day." He knew that moments of peace like this were precious, and he wanted to make the most of them while he could. The rest of the day passed with Eli checking fences, inspecting the cattle, and preparing for any possible return of the intruders. Each step was careful, deliberate, as he made sure that the ranch remained secure. He worked alongside Martha, who moved with quiet efficiency, and the children, who helped as best they could. Despite the tension, there was a sense of unity and resilience in their family. They had weathered difficulties before, and they would continue to do so. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink, Eli stood on the porch, watching over his land. He felt a mixture of pride and cautious anticipation. The day had tested him, and he had emerged intact, but he knew that the challenges of the frontier were far from over. Each decision he made carried weight, and the right choice often required patience, courage, and wisdom. That evening, as the Turner family gathered for dinner, the atmosphere was calm but thoughtful. Martha and the children listened as Eli recounted the day's events, emphasizing the lessons of observation, judgment, and courage. "Strength alone isn't enough," he told them. "You must also think carefully, understand the situation, and act wisely. That is what will keep you safe." Later, as night fell and the stars sparkled in the clear sky above, Eli remained outside for a moment, looking across the ranch. Shadow grazed quietly nearby, the cattle huddled peacefully, and the wind carried the faint sounds of the land settling for the night. Eli knew that tomorrow could bring new challenges, perhaps even greater than those of today. But he felt ready. He had faced fear, tested his judgment, and made a choice that preserved both his family's safety and his principles. Eli's thoughts wandered to the broader lessons of life on the frontier. The world was harsh, and danger was never far away. But character, courage, and careful decision-making were what defined a man more than sheer strength. Today had proven that to him, and he hoped that his actions would leave a lasting example for his children. The night passed quietly, and the ranch rested under the glow of the moon. Eli went to bed with a sense of calm purpose, knowing that the frontier would continue to test him. But he was prepared, mentally and physically, to face whatever came next. The story of the Turner Ranch was far from over, and the events of this day would remain a turning point in the life of Eli Turner. A day when he proved that courage combined with wisdom could overcome even the most pressing challenges. The first light of dawn spread across the Turner Ranch, casting a soft glow over the hills and plains. Eli Turner, he stood near the fence, watching the cattle move slowly across the field. The events of the past days lingered in his mind, yet there was a sense of calm now. The confrontation with the rustlers had passed, and while Eli knew life on the frontier could change in an instant, there was a moment here, rare and precious, where peace seemed to hold. Eli mounted Shadow and rode across the pasture, checking the fences one last time before heading back toward the main house. The morning air was cool, and the wind whispered through the grass, carrying the soft sounds of nature waking. Birds called to one another and the cattle lowed quietly. It was a simple, ordinary morning, yet after the tension and uncertainty of the previous days, every sound, every movement felt meaningful. Eli felt the weight of responsibility for his land and his family, but he also felt a quiet satisfaction knowing he had done the right thing. When he returned to the house, Martha, she, was already outside, carrying a basket of fresh vegetables and bread for breakfast. Her hair was tied neatly, though a few strands had escaped in the morning breeze. She smiled when she saw him. "Did everything go all right?" she asked softly, worry still in her eyes. Eli dismounted and held her hands gently. "Yes, everything is fine," he said. "The land is safe and the cattle are unharmed. For now, the danger has passed." The children, Tommy and Lily, they ran out to greet him, their laughter brightening the quiet morning. Eli knelt to ruffle their hair, feeling the warmth of family that made the frontier life worth all its hardships. "Breakfast is ready," Martha said, smiling at the scene. "Come eat before the sun gets too high." The family gathered around the small wooden table, sharing food and conversation. There was an ordinary rhythm to the morning, but for Eli, every moment carried significance. This was what he was protecting, not just land or cattle, but the safety and happiness of his family. After breakfast, Eli rode out once more to check the northern pasture. He wanted to ensure that the rustlers had not returned and that the fences were secure. The air was still and quiet, but his instincts remained alert. As he moved along the ridge, he noticed small details: the trampled grass, the direction of the tracks, and even the way the shadows fell across the land. Everything seemed normal, yet Eli knew that vigilance was never optional on the frontier. Peace could be temporary, and readiness was a constant companion. Hours passed as Eli worked steadily, inspecting the fences, adjusting loose boards, and checking on the cattle. He spoke softly to Shadow, guiding the horse along the terrain with gentle confidence. He noticed the cattle grazing peacefully, calves following their mothers, the land stretching endlessly under the sun. Despite the earlier threats, life here carried a quiet resilience. Eli understood that the frontier was not only about danger and challenge, it was also about patience, observation, and care. These were the qualities that allowed a family like his to thrive. By mid-afternoon, Eli returned to the house, where Martha had begun preparing a small meal for the family. They spoke quietly about the events of the past days, discussing what had happened and what lessons they could take from it. "You handled it well," Martha said softly. "You protected us, but you did it without unnecessary harm." Eli nodded, appreciating her words. "Sometimes the hardest thing is choosing the right action," he said. "It's easy to act with force. It's harder to act with wisdom." Tommy and Lily joined them, curious about the conversation. Eli smiled and knelt to speak with them. "Life on the frontier is full of challenges," he said. "Sometimes people make mistakes, and sometimes they make choices they later regret. We must be ready to protect ourselves, but we must also be fair and kind when we can. Strength alone is not enough. Judgment, patience, and courage are just as important." The children listened intently, absorbing the lessons from their father's experiences. Later in the day, Eli received a visit from one of the neighboring ranchers, Mr. Hayes, who had heard of the recent events. "I heard what happened," Hayes said quietly, his voice filled with respect. "I didn't expect you to handle it without a fight." "Most men would have drawn weapons." Eli smiled faintly. "It's not always about fighting," he said. "Sometimes the strongest action is showing control and wisdom. I wanted to protect my family and my land without unnecessary conflict." Hayes nodded, understanding the deeper lesson. The frontier was harsh, but reputation and respect were earned through both strength and judgment. As evening approached, Eli walked along the fence line one final time. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the land. He felt a sense of accomplishment. The cattle were safe, the fences repaired, and his family secure. More importantly, he had made choices that aligned with his values. Courage and wisdom had guided him through the challenges, and he had emerged stronger and more confident in his own judgment. The family gathered for dinner as the sky darkened. The stars appeared, sparkling in the clear night sky, and the land grew quiet. The Turner Ranch was a small island of safety in a vast, unpredictable frontier. Eli felt gratitude for this peace, knowing that it could be fleeting but also precious. He shared stories with his children about his father, about the land, and about the importance of character. Every story carried a lesson, a way to prepare them for the world they would inherit. Later that night, Eli stepped outside one last time. Shadow grazed nearby, the cattle settled quietly, and the wind whispered softly through the grass. He thought about the rustlers and the choices he had made. Acting with firmness and mercy had not been easy, but it had been necessary. By choosing the path of wisdom, he had preserved life, protected his family, and demonstrated what it meant to live with courage and honor. Eli looked across the ranch, taking in the land that had been in his family for generations. The rolling hills, the pastures, the distant tree lines, all of it was a testament to perseverance, hard work, and care. He knew that life on the frontier would continue to test him, that new challenges would arise, and that danger could appear at any moment. Yet he felt confident, prepared, and ready to meet whatever came next. As he finally returned inside, Martha was waiting, a quiet understanding passing between them. They had faced uncertainty together, and their partnership had grown stronger through it. Tommy and Lily were already asleep, exhausted but safe, and Eli felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Protecting them, guiding them, and teaching them the ways of the land was the most important work he could do. The nights on the frontier were often long and quiet, but tonight felt different. There was a sense of peace, of life continuing in the balance of effort, care, and respect for the land. Eli lay awake for a while, thinking about the events of the past days and the lessons learned. Courage, patience, and wisdom, these were the qualities that had seen him through, and they would continue to guide him in the days to come. By the next morning, the Turner Ranch was alive with activity once more. Eli, Martha, and the children moved through their daily routines with a renewed sense of purpose. The threat of the rustlers had passed, at least for now, but the lessons remained. Vigilance, careful judgment, and strength tempered by compassion were the tools that would carry them through any future challenges. Word of Eli's actions spread throughout the neighboring ranches. People talked not just about the courage he had shown, but about the wisdom and restraint. The story became a lesson for the frontier community, a reminder that true strength was not measured solely by force, but by the choices one made when faced with pressure, danger, and uncertainty. Eli's name came to represent a balance of toughness and humanity, an example for others to follow. Months passed, and the land recovered from the recent tension. The cattle flourished, the crops grew steadily, and the Turner family thrived. Eli continued to work the ranch with care, ensuring that fences were secure, water sources maintained, and the cattle healthy. He taught Tommy and Lily the skills they would need to survive and prosper on the frontier, sharing the values of responsibility, courage, and fairness. In the evenings, Eli often stood on the porch, looking across the plains, reflecting on what had happened. The challenges of the frontier were not over, and there would always be threats, hardships, and difficult decisions. But he knew he had proven something important. That courage, combined with careful judgment and compassion, could overcome fear, danger, and uncertainty. The Turner Ranch became a place of respect in the community, not just for its productivity, but for the values it represented. Eli's decisions had shaped not only his own family's future, but had influenced the way neighbors approached challenges, conflicts, and the hardships of frontier life. His story became an example, a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, integrity, patience, and courage could prevail. And so, life continued on the Turner Ranch. Eli Turner remained vigilant, hardworking, and caring, guiding his family through the unpredictability of the frontier. He had faced fear, tested his judgment, and made decisions that not only protected his family but set an example for others. The land, the cattle, and the people who lived upon it were all intertwined in a story of resilience, wisdom, and courage, a story that would be remembered for generations. As the sun set on another day, casting long shadows across the fields, Eli felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had faced challenges, made difficult choices, and lived by the values he believed in. The frontier was never easy, but for the Turner family it was home, and through courage, wisdom, and care, they would continue to thrive.